So, I never thought I'd write this, but here I am. Let's rewind to when I was 5 years old. I was already playing little sonatas on the harpsichord, but English? That felt like some alien code. Back then, my father was obsessed with polishing me into the perfect prodigy, so every day was music, music, and more music. One afternoon, though, while we were in London for one of those endless tours, I overheard a boy outside yelling, "Come here." His voice cut through the street noise like a trumpet. I didn't know what it meant, but something inside me just lit up. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't Italian. It wasn't German. It felt strange, sharp, almost like a secret doorway. When I tried to mimic it, my father scolded me. "Wolfgang, focus on the notes, not nonsense." But it stuck. That phrase rattled around in my head for days. It was the first time I realized that language could feel like music, like a melody you couldn't get out of your head. Here's the thing, it wasn't just fascination. It was rebellion. At 5, I didn't have the words for it, but I wanted something of my own. Music was my father's kingdom. English, that could be mine. And yet, even then, there was this strange tension. My curiosity felt dangerous, like sneaking food before dinner. I had no idea that one tiny phrase, "come here," would set me on a path that would eventually betray me in ways I couldn't even imagine. By the time I was 6, I was supposed to be dazzling noble courts with my little fingers dancing on ivory keys. And I did that. But every free second in London, I'd sneak glances at kids playing in the street, shouting things I didn't understand. They weren't dressed in silk. They weren't bowing to dukes. They were just alive. I started keeping a notebook. My father thought I was jotting down scales. But no, I was writing down sounds. "Come here. Stop it. Go away." To me, those scraps were like forbidden notes in a forbidden scale. My father once caught me mouthing English words under my breath, and he slammed the cover of the harpsichord shut so hard I thought he'd broken my hands. He barked, "Wolfgang, people will not remember you for gibberish. They will remember you for genius." That stung. It felt like he was saying, "This isn't yours, you don't deserve it." And yet, the sting only made me more determined. Betrayal can come from someone loving you too much in the wrong way. I learned that early. He wanted me to shine, but only in the spotlight he built for me. So I doubled down in secret. Every servant, every guard, every English child I could corner, I practiced with them in whispers. My first actual English conversation wasn't with a noble, but with a kitchen boy. I pointed at bread and muttered, "I want bread." He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the loaf, but he gave it to me. I can't explain it. Bread never tasted so victorious. That was the moment I knew. Music wasn't going to be the only language I mastered, but I also knew my father would never forgive me if he found out. By 7, my English had gone from little scraps to short phrases. Nothing polished, but enough to make me feel like I had a secret world outside of my father's shadow. I thought I was clever, writing scales in my notebook that were actually little English phrases disguised as notes. But then one night, in a smoky tavern after a performance, my father betrayed me in a way I wasn't ready for. He had taken my notebook, probably snooping like he always did, and while he was drinking with a few English gentlemen, he pulled it out. He laughed and said, "See what my boy wastes his mind on. Nonsense words. Instead of practicing Bach, he scratches this filth." He read my words out loud. My shaky, "I want bread." My clumsy, "good day." The men roared with laughter. One even slapped me on the back, mocking my accent. I felt my face burning, but I couldn't say anything. Not in German, not in English. My mouth was dry. That was the first time English hurt. What had felt like my secret treasure suddenly felt like a weapon turned against me. I hated my father in that moment. Pure, childish hatred. But deeper than that, I felt ashamed, like maybe I was wasting myself. Still, when I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling beams, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stop. If anything, I was going to get better. Not for applause. Not for him. But so that one day, no one could laugh at me again. I didn't know it then, but that stubborn little fire would carry me through bigger betrayals later, ones that would cut much deeper than a tavern laugh. By 12, my life was nothing but coaches, courts, and candlelit halls. Everyone expected me to smile, bow, and perform like a wind-up toy. My father thrived in it. He lived for the applause I earned. But me? I started to suffocate. That's when English turned from a curiosity into an escape. Whenever I was dragged into some Duke's salon, surrounded by people whispering in French or Italian, I'd scan the room for any English voices. And when I found them, my heart would race. I'd slip in a word, sometimes a phrase, and the look on their faces, it was like I'd suddenly belonged somewhere else. I remember one night in Paris. I was exhausted after playing until my fingers ached, and an English merchant's daughter handed me a cup of wine. She said softly, "You play beautifully." I nearly dropped the glass. No one had ever said that to me in English before. I managed to stammer back, "Thank you very much." She smiled, and it was like I'd been given air after drowning. But of course my father noticed. He always did. Afterward, he hissed at me, "Do not waste time with their language. You are here to impress, not to fraternize." It was the same story. Every step I took toward making English mine felt like a betrayal to him, and every time he tried to pull me back, I felt the betrayal in return. We were tangled in this silent war neither of us admitted existed. I started sneaking letters, tiny notes in broken English, to kids I met in cities. They probably laughed at my mistakes, but I didn't care. Each letter felt like a key to a door outside the golden cage my father had built for me. And yet, I had no idea how costly that escape would become once I grew older. Because the deeper I went into English, the more it would end up costing me in ways I couldn't control. By the time I was 15, music wasn't the only thing pulling me from city to city. Everywhere we went, I looked for English speakers. My father thought I was networking with nobles, but really, I was chasing conversations, phrases, anything that made me feel like I was building my own life. That's when I met her, Anna, the daughter of an English diplomat in Vienna. She wasn't noble in the stiff, powdered sense. She laughed loudly, spoke quickly, and when she realized I understood a bit of English, she slowed down and actually taught me. Words rolled off her tongue like music, and I memorized them like secret melodies. For a few months, I was convinced I'd found not just a language, but love. I wrote her letters in English, clumsy, misspelled, patched together with dictionaries and courage. She corrected them, teased me, encouraged me. She even wrote once, "You sound more yourself in English than in German." I carried that note everywhere, like it was proof that the real Wolfgang existed outside my father's shadow. But then, betrayal struck again. One evening, I came early to her family's house, heart pounding, clutching a little composition I'd written just for her, an English love song. When I walked into the parlor, she wasn't alone. She was laughing with another young man, reading my broken English letters aloud, mocking my mistakes, exaggerating my accent, until they both doubled over in laughter. My chest went hollow. It was the same sting I'd felt years ago in that tavern, but sharper. This time it wasn't my father. It was someone I trusted, someone I thought saw me. I left before she noticed me, tore the composition into shreds in the alley, and swore to myself I'd never write another word of English for anyone else again. Of course, that was a lie. But at 15, betrayal feels like the end of the world, and I honestly thought I was done with English forever. I tried to quit. After Anna's betrayal, I stuffed my English notes at the bottom of my case, told myself I'd never risk that kind of humiliation again. But grief has a funny way of curdling into defiance. By 17, I was restless. Courts kept parading me like some circus act. Here's Wolfgang the prodigy. Watch him improvise. I smiled, bowed, played, but inside I was seething. That anger needed somewhere to go, and it found its way back to English. I started studying harder than ever, but this time it wasn't about letters to girls or childish rebellion. It was about power. If people could laugh at me for stumbling, then I would master it so well they'd choke on their own smugness. I bribed servants for English books, smuggled dictionaries into my luggage, even cornered diplomats after performances just to practice. One diplomat, a sharp-eyed Scotsman, took pity on me. He said, "If you want to be taken seriously in our tongue, stop thinking like a musician. Start thinking like a soldier. Discipline, structure, repetition." It stung, but it was what I needed. I practiced like scales, verbs, tenses, idioms, until my head ached. And then came my first triumph. In Munich, during a dull dinner full of puffed-up nobility, a British officer made a joke at my expense, assuming I couldn't understand. Without missing a beat, I replied in perfect English, "I assure you, sir, the joke sounds far less clever once translated." The entire table froze. The officer's face turned scarlet. My father glared daggers at me, furious that I'd stolen attention without his script. But for the first time, I didn't care. I'd carved out something of my own. Of course, victories never come without consequences. My father's resentment deepened, and I could feel something breaking between us. English wasn't just a language anymore. It had become the wedge driving us apart. By the time I hit my 20s, I thought English was finally paying off. While other composers were stuck waiting for scraps from princes, I was corresponding with publishers and musicians in London directly. My letters weren't perfect, but they were sharp enough to get me into circles my father never could have dreamed of. For a while, it felt intoxicating. I wasn't the boy wonder anymore. I was Wolfgang, the man who could navigate salons in German, French, Italian, and English. The world felt wider, freer. I could almost forget the humiliation, the betrayals that had pushed me this far. But then came the London fiasco. A publisher promised to release one of my symphonies, praising my charming command of the English tongue in his letters. I was naive, proud, and desperate to be seen as more than a traveling act. I trusted him. I even translated some of my own program notes into English, sweating over every word to sound intelligent, respectable. And then, nothing. Months later, I found out the man had taken my work, slapped another name on it, and published it as his own. When I confronted him, stumbling in anger through my English, he sneered. "Perhaps you should stick to music, sir. Your words are better than your contracts." That cut deeper than I want to admit. My language, my pride, the very thing I thought gave me independence, it had been used to swindle me. I'd walked straight into betrayal again, and this time it cost me money I desperately needed. I remember sitting alone in a London inn, staring at my half-empty purse, feeling more humiliated than I had at 15. For the first time, I thought maybe my father had been right all along. Maybe words were nonsense, and music was the only truth I had. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stop. Every betrayal tied me tighter to English, like a wound you can't stop picking at. It wasn't just rebellion anymore. It was obsession. After the London fiasco, I went home bitter. I couldn't look at an English word without hearing that publisher's sneer. For weeks, I shoved my notebooks aside and buried myself in music, convincing myself I'd finally learned my lesson. But here's the cruel part. Silence only made it worse. Every time I heard English in the streets of Vienna, it was like a phantom tugging at me. I hated it, but I couldn't stay away. I'd lean in to catch phrases, just like when I was a boy, and the obsession would start all over again. I began to ask myself, why am I doing this? Music was supposed to be my gift, my way out, my legacy. And yet I was sinking hours, days, into a language that seemed to do nothing but betray me. Was it rebellion? Pride? Or was I secretly hoping English could unlock a version of me that no one had the power to laugh at or control? I remember one night, staring at my harpsichord, feeling completely torn. My father had died by then, and a strange emptiness had settled in. No one was forcing me to choose anymore, but the war still raged inside me. Part of me whispered, "Enough. Forget English. Focus on your genius, Wolfgang." Another part hissed back, "If you give it up now, you'll never be more than the puppet they made you." That inner split nearly drove me mad. I started drinking more, staying out late, scribbling half music, half English phrases on scraps of paper I'd never show anyone. Sometimes I'd wake up with ink on my hands, no memory of what I'd written. It wasn't just learning a language anymore. It felt like fighting a shadow of myself I couldn't pin down. And the scariest thought? Maybe the shadow was winning. By my mid-20s, English had crept back into my life in the most dangerous way possible, through love letters. Music had always been my tool for seduction, but there was something thrilling about slipping English phrases into my words, like little sparks no one expected from a Viennese composer. Constance, my future wife, wasn't fluent, but she adored the novelty. I'd write her notes like, "Good night, my darling," or "Forever yours" in English, and she'd giggle, keeping them tucked away like treasures. For the first time, English wasn't rebellion or business or obsession. It was intimacy, a secret between us. But secrets, as I should have known, don't stay pure. One night at a gathering, after too much wine, Constance's cousin got hold of one of my letters. He read it aloud in broken, mocking tones, exaggerating my mistakes, twisting tender words into something ridiculous. The room roared with laughter, just like in that tavern when I was a boy. Constance tried to defend me, but the damage was done. My heart dropped into the same hollow pit I'd fallen into with Anna years before. It was betrayal, not just from her cousin, but from life itself. How many times would English turn from treasure to weapon in my hands? I lashed out. I stopped writing to her in English, even stopped speaking it around her. She begged me to continue. It had meant something to her, she said, but I couldn't. The humiliation festered too deeply. I pushed her away without realizing it, and for months our closeness dimmed. I learned something bitter then. Love and language are fragile, and when you mix them, you risk breaking both. Still, I couldn't walk away. Even through heartbreak, the obsession burned. English had me chained, and I didn't know how to break free. By 28, I was restless again. Vienna was suffocating me. Same courts, same critics, same whispers about my debts. I thought maybe if I poured English into my music, I could shock them into hearing me differently. So I did something bold. I wrote songs with English lyrics, experimenting with rhythms that matched the cadence of the language. It felt risky, thrilling, like breaking into a locked room no one thought I belonged in. For the first time, English wasn't just scribbles in notebooks or clumsy love letters. It was part of my art. But the backlash came fast. Patrons smirked. One critic sneered that my attempts at English verse proved the composer lacked seriousness. Another said, Mozart should stick to notes, not nonsense. My gamble to be seen as worldly and innovative turned into yet another humiliation. Even worse, some English audiences laughed at the imperfections. They didn't hear the sincerity. They only heard the cracks in my grammar, the awkward accent. It felt like standing on stage naked, with everyone pointing out flaws I couldn't hide. Constance tried to reassure me. She said, "They mock because they don't understand." But I understood all too well. English wasn't freeing me anymore. It was becoming a mirror for every insecurity I carried. And yet, I couldn't let go. I revised, reworked, scribbled new verses, desperate to make the words sing the way music did. Each rejection only made me dig deeper. Betrayal was turning into fuel, and I wasn't sure if that was genius or madness. The more I fought, the clearer it became. English wasn't just a language anymore. It was a battle for identity, and I was losing ground. By my early 30s, English had become more than a curiosity. It was leverage. I used it to correspond with London musicians, to negotiate with publishers abroad, to chase opportunities my rivals couldn't. For a while, it felt like the one thing that gave me an edge. That's when I grew close to a violinist named James, an Englishman living in Vienna. He seemed fascinated by me, always encouraging my use of his language. He'd correct my idioms, laugh with me, not at me, finally, and insist, "Wolfgang, you'll conquer London one day." I believed him. I trusted him more than I should have. But betrayal has a habit of lurking in the shadows I least expect. One winter, I sent James a manuscript with notes in English, my newest symphony, annotated with explanations I hoped would dazzle a London audience. Weeks later, I found out he'd presented those same notes as his own work to a group of patrons. My words, my music, twisted under someone else's name. When I confronted him, shaking with fury, he shrugged. "It's just business, my friend. You're too naive. You give too freely." That cut deeper than any critic's mockery. Here was someone I thought was helping me, someone who pretended to nurture my English, when all the while he was siphoning it for himself. I drank heavily that night, replaying every conversation, every correction he'd given me, wondering if it had all been a ploy. For the first time, I asked myself whether English was a curse, that every time I reached for it, it only handed me another knife in the back. But by then, I was in too deep. Betrayal had become as familiar to me as music itself. And somehow, I couldn't stop listening for the next English phrase drifting through the streets. Like a siren's call, I was powerless to resist. By 33, my body was giving out faster than my music could save me. Money slipped through my fingers like water, debts piling, patrons growing cold, doors closing one by one. And still, I clung to English like it might somehow deliver me. I spent nights hunched over candlelight, translating letters, practicing phrases aloud until my throat was raw. Constance begged me to rest, but I couldn't. It wasn't just about words anymore. It was about proving I wasn't the fool they all thought. Every sneer, every betrayal, every laugh still echoed in my skull, and I believed if I could master English fully, I'd silence them all. But the cost was brutal. My composition slowed. My health worsened. Friends whispered that I was distracted, slipping. And the truth was, yes, I was slipping. Not just from music, but from life itself. I felt like I was drowning in two worlds. One of sound, one of words, never belonging fully to either. I remember coughing blood into a rag one night, staring at an English grammar book on the table. My first thought wasn't fear of dying. It was rage that I still hadn't mastered irregular verbs. Madness, maybe. Obsession, certainly. But I couldn't shake it. That was the cruel irony. English had begun as freedom, rebellion, intimacy. By my 30s, it had become a chain, dragging me down while I kept insisting it was wings. And betrayal? It wasn't just others anymore. It was me betraying myself, pouring time, health, and sanity into something that only seemed to mock me in return. By 34, I knew my body was failing. The fevers came more often, the weakness lingered longer, and Vienna felt colder with every passing month. Yet even as death crept closer, I found myself reaching for English again, like an old wound you press just to feel alive. I began writing little phrases in my notebooks, not for publishers, not for patrons, but for myself. I am tired. I am afraid. I love. Short, clumsy sentences that no critic could sneer at, because no one else would ever see them. For the first time, English wasn't rebellion or ambition. It was confession. Constance found one of those notes once. Instead of mocking me, she kissed my forehead and whispered, "You don't need their language to be understood." But I shook my head. To me, English had become a mirror, showing me parts of myself I couldn't face in German. The strange thing is, in those last months, English gave me comfort. The same tongue that had betrayed me through laughter, theft, and humiliation became the one place I could pour my truths without judgment. Because no one was listening anymore. But comfort can be cruel, too. When I wrote, "I will not finish," in shaky English, I knew it wasn't just about a symphony. It was about me. I still hoped, foolishly, that someday someone would read those broken sentences and see not a prodigy, not a failure, not a debt-ridden fool, but a man who tried to grasp something bigger than himself and couldn't quite hold it. By the time I turned 35, my hands trembled more than they played. My body betrayed me daily, spasms, fevers, exhaustion that no amount of willpower could fight. Yet, strangely, English never left my lips. On my deathbed, with Constance at my side, I whispered scraps of it between bouts of coughing. "I am cold. Don't go. Thank you." Simple words, almost childish, yet they carried a weight no aria ever had. Constance stroked my hand, nodding as if she understood everything, even when my sentences crumbled. I thought often about that boy in London, yelling "Come here," on the street when I was 5. How those two little words had sparked decades of fascination, humiliation, betrayal, and obsession. And now, here I was, dying, and still clinging to the same language like it held the key to who I truly was. But the truth hit me in those final hours. English hadn't saved me. It hadn't made me freer, richer, or more respected. All it had done was strip me raw, forcing me to see myself without the armor of genius. That was terrifying and strangely beautiful. When my strength faded, The last thing I managed to scrawl in shaky English on a scrap of paper was, "Remember me." Not in German, not in music, but in the very language that had haunted me. I don't know if anyone ever read it. So here I am, 35, looking back on it all, on the symphonies, the courts, the betrayals, and yes, the obsession with English that followed me like a shadow. If you've read this far, maybe you're wondering, was it worth it? Did English ever give me what I was searching for? The honest answer? No. And yes. No, because every time I reached for it, someone laughed, stole, or twisted it against me. I poured years of energy into mastering it, and in the end, I died poor, sick, and mocked by people who thought I'd wasted myself. But yes, because English was never really about words. It was about me trying to carve out an identity outside of my father's grip, outside of the courts, outside of genius. It was rebellion, heartbreak, obsession, confession, a mirror that forced me to see myself raw, without applause. And in that sense, it gave me something music never could: honesty. What did I learn? That obsession can build you, but it can also break you. That betrayal hurts most when it comes from people you trusted. And that sometimes, the thing you chase your whole life isn't meant to save you. It's meant to show you who you are when everything else is stripped away. If you're reading this and you've got your own English, that one thing you keep chasing, even when it hurts, my advice is simple. Don't mistake it for salvation. Learn from it. Fight with it. Even let it wound you if you must. But don't let it steal the life you still have to live. At the end of the day, whether in German, Italian, or broken English, all I really wanted was to be remembered as more than a puppet, more than a prodigy, just as a man who tried. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.